Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast, a weekly podcast whose mission is multifaceted. Each week when you tune in, you will find episodes that question best practices, challenge music education dogma, facilitate conversations about touchy topics, demonstrate pedagogies, and conversations where colleagues learn from each other. Welcome to part 4 of the First Days of Choir series. I'm going to first start out by saying thank you. Thank you so much for engaging with this content. This has been an explosion that I did not see coming. Once I started this series, it was really kind of a whim. I was thinking in my own selfish terms at first of thinking about what is a series I could do on the show that aligns with my schedule right now. Because as I know, as some of you might know, if you follow me on social media, I've recently become a baseball coach of my son's competitive baseball team, which is something that I just don't have time for. And I have actually been unable, really, to engage with getting interviews scheduled in the months of June and July for the most part because of baseball. And so I started thinking about what is a thing that could be valuable and that could provide help to educators that I can do on my own time. So like on my own schedule when I don't have to coordinate with other people to line up these interviews, which don't worry, those are coming back. I've got lots of interviews scheduled for the fall. But that was the initial reason. That's all it was, guys, was I started thinking what would be a good thing for me to talk through and think through that I also think could be helpful. And oh my goodness, it's exploded. The growth on this platform in the month of July 2025 has been bigger than since back before the show was kind of on the map. The rate of growth over on the Patreon has been absolutely incredible. I appreciate the support. It really, really is the way that I pay the bills to make this show. It's a job and it's a regular task for me, and I'm committed to creating this weekly content. And I just love it when it strikes a nerve. So this has been something that has been very helpful to people, I think, and I'm getting lots of great feedback for it. So what I did was I created a sub-page on the website to house all 4 of these initial parts to this series, and then that allows me in an easy method later on to create more. Every time I make something that is first days of school or first weeks of school related, I'll simply add it to this. So then it becomes an easily searchable resource for you alongside of things like the literacy series on the show, which you can find at choralosophy.com/music literacy, or the vocal ped stuff, which you can find at choralosophy.com/vocal ped. And now you'll have choralosophy.com/first days series, all one word. And you'll find the links to these things and show notes and blogs, etc. And it's really easy to track down. And that way you don't have to remember where all these episodes are. Music educators, performers, and event organizers, listen up. What if I told you there's a platform that sells your tickets, markets your concerts, manages volunteers, runs fundraisers, and even tracks merchandise and concession sales, all in one place? Meet Ludus, the all-in-one event solution built for the arts. And if you need help, their live customer support is like having your own backstage crew. I know I've used it a ton of times to get quick answers on the day of a show, and we need to solve a problem, and they pop right up. And here's the best part. It's completely free for your organization. Join them today because your music deserves more than just a ticketing platform. So in this episode, this is part 4, and we're going to be talking about the materials that we use and put in their hands when school starts. Now, for music teachers, in most cases, that is the sheet music. So AKA, that is our repertoire. Those are the songs we are choosing for kids. And for them, it's okay if we trick them into thinking that these are just songs we're singing. These are just the songs. There's no big reason, but we're just singing these songs. But in reality, Harry Wong is going to have some really, really interesting insights for us. Of course, he didn't talk about choir. I'm translating him into choir, where he might be talking about textbooks, and I'm going to be talking to us about sheet music and the things that we choose in our repertoire. What do we look for in our repertoire to get the results that we want later on? Because it is a long game, people. It's not just the music we choose for the fall concert. It's the music we choose for the fall concert and how those skills that they learned in preparing that score move into the winter concert or the spring or evaluative festival or building their literacy skills. It is a long game over the course of hopefully more than 1 year that they take our classes, but at the very minimum, they take us for 1 year. What are they going to learn over the course of that time? So that is the purpose of this episode. And I mentioned the growth over on Patreon. I'm going to do some shout outs. Of course, people on certain tiers over there on Patreon get that shout out. But of course, you can also do a paid subscription on Substack to support the show, in which case you'll still have access to all of the rubrics that I've been discussing in this series. You'll have access to the notes that I've made to go along with these episodes, so that if you're more of a written person, you just want bullet points, you can see those there. They're a little bit scattered, but I'm kind of still organizing them. And then you can see the repertoire list that's there. I'm going to be adding to it over the course of this school year with this content in mind. So you can subscribe on patreon.com/choralosophy or choralosophy.substack.com. So check this episode out. I hope it's helpful. And of course, write in, ask questions, go over to the Choralosophers Facebook page. We can talk about these things more. And I do want to hear your opinions, since this series was a mostly solo episode. So 2 parts mainly to the episode. First, we're going to talk about some concepts from Harry Wong. In the second half of the episode, I'm going to be diving into some specific aspects of repertoire and specific instances in repertoire that I might look at to decide, is this right for my beginners? Is this right for intermediate, advanced type kids, etc.? And you can hear me think through some of those things. So stick around, and thanks for listening. Shout outs for the Inner Circle and producer tiers over on Patreon. We have Brian Long, Chandler Smith, Venture Studios, David Kowalczyk, Kyle Peterson, Max Jackson, Michael Heron, Rebecca Chalk, and Steve and Kathy Kakachik. All right, we're going to start the meat of this episode going right back to some of the Harry Wong ideas that are the inspiration for this series, with some quotes of his and then some discussion about the ways that we can frame this for ourselves as choir teachers and as music teachers, because I do think that this whole series of 4 episodes that I've published in the last couple months are designed to be the type of episodes that you can come back to next year, or that a person could discover next year and have them still be relevant. Because I think in a lot of ways, the book that Harry Wong wrote all those years ago in the 90s is pretty evergreen, because human nature and how children learn doesn't really change a whole lot. So these are some important concepts that I've pulled out, and I'm not necessarily saying this is the last of the series, although it is the last of the series for this summer, because I'm going to head back to school next week. And so this is my last one for this year, and I will continue to add more episodes to this series, which now has a sub-page on my website dedicated to this series, and it's simply choralosophy.com/firstdays series, all one word, and you can find that link in the show notes. So here's quote number 1 here. The most important day of a person's education is the first day of school, not graduation day. For us as choir directors choosing our repertoire, and for us, that is our material, that is our textbook, that is our primary learning material that we are giving kids. It is the way of containing and storing all of the concepts that we hope to teach. That does not, of course, mean that all music has to be written down, and that when we teach something by rote that we aren't teaching them real stuff. That's not what I'm saying, although people will say that that's what I'm saying, but that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the primary material that we would purchase and have ready is very similar to a textbook. And I think that what that says about us is that it underscores how materials that we introduce right away, immediately the first day of school, become the expectation for the students, that they are being handed tools. They are being handed something that it is their job to go find something in that material. It is their job to go take that piece of sheet music and turn it into something. And that's, of course, why one of my big advocacies is that we need to be better at teaching kids to read music. Again, not because it's the only way we learn music, but because it is one of the best ways, if not the best way. No, it's the best way. It is the best way to have a student not need you at all and just be handed tools and materials and say, go learn this song, right? So that's why it's one of the most important things, if not the most important thing that we do. And so when we choose that repertoire, we should choose it with that in mind. We should choose it with the idea that if I were to hand this music to a set of kids at that appropriate age level, would they have the tools necessary? Or not ahead of time, of course, because we're teaching beginners oftentimes, or do I have the time in the rehearsal, before a performance, before whatever it is that is our culminating activity, do I have that time to teach them the tools for this piece of music so that we can perform it and we can prepare it in as independent, student-led, student-generated music making as possible? Okay, so that's just a framework. So how we choose those things and how we supply those things on the first day of school, how we introduce them, becomes critical. Another quote here: effective teachers spend the first 2 weeks teaching students to be in control of their own actions in a consistent classroom environment. The consistency hinges on the materials and the routines that we present early in the school year, like how assignments and instruments are handled, how we use the piano. Of course, in my class, we use it to give a tonic only. So what are the tools available to our students? How do we demonstrate how to use those tools? Let's go out into a practice room. There's no teacher around. How do you get your starting pitch? Teaching them how to find that on a Chromebook, for example, Google Piano Keyboard. Teach them how to play an F. Teach them how to play a D. These are very simple concepts that can be introduced in the first week of school, and it can and should always be tied to the repertoire that they're learning. So in my situation, we use Sight Reading Factory every day, including the first day of school, and I start to teach them these concepts on the screen when using Sight Reading Factory. But then, of course, we pass out a piece of music or even project the music on the screen so that then they're starting to see their performance repertoire in the same way that they are seeing their Sight Reading Factory exercises, and they're going to get the starting pitch the same way. We're not going to do a starting pitch on the screen in one way and then pass out music and get our starting pitch a different way. We're not going to do a Sight Reading Factory exercise and work out everything a cappella like we do every single day, and then open up our performance repertoire and suddenly do it a different way. Because then, of course, time is limited. We can't teach them to master every way. That's just not a thing that is possible. And as longtime listeners know, one of my favorite quotes is, "Don't try to do impossible things. You will just beat your head against a wall." So we don't try to teach them to master every way. And so what I'm advocating for is that we align our literacy work at the beginning of class directly into the repertoire that we choose, which means there needs to be some type of connection between the repertoire and the process for building their literacy skills, their audiation skills. It is not just a visual thing. It is an auditory thing. Can we build their audio library? Can we then teach them to apply that library to visual symbols? When I see that symbol, it's that sound that I know, right? Which is no different than any other language. So our sheet music, our repertoire that we choose for them, is our textbook for these concepts. Here's another one. In an effective classroom, students should not only know what they are doing, they should also know why and how. So one of my favorite things about the way class operates in my environment is because we get really good and prioritize reading, we get really good at it, and we get really good at it pretty quickly, which means that the learning process, the learning of notes and rhythms, just gets faster and faster and faster, which as exponentially, by the way. I'm still trying to convince Dawn over at Sight Reading Factory. I've sent a couple emails. I need to do it again, that they need to move past level 6 for solo singers. My kids oftentimes get to junior year and they're bored with level 6. And so I've invented level 6 plus, where with some kids, usually 3 or 4 kids per graduation class get to that level 6 plus by 12th grade, where I will just hand them a level 6 because that doesn't go to level 7. And they're getting it so easily the first time that I'm having to throw things at them while they're doing it. So for an example, it would be like, okay, scan this exercise, level 6. Here's your tonic. Start audiating, whatever it is that you do, whatever your process is. And then I'll say, okay, now read it, but you have to snap on beats 2 and 4. Or read it, but you have to step back and forth, left foot, right foot on every single beat. All right, giving them something to do to challenge them, to cause them to make a mistake, because the whole method is that the mistakes are good. And if we get to a point where there are no more mistakes, then what that means for me as a teacher is that I need to crank it up, because I'm doing them a disservice if they are flying through things without making any mistakes. So in this ties into the repertoire decision too, because when we are able to have these processes flow quicker and we're able to get to the right answers quicker as a group. Okay, this is back to the quote now. Sorry, I did a little tangent there. In an effective classroom, students should not only know what they are doing, they should also know why. So when I talk to those level 6 plus kids, for example, we talk about why you are doing this thing that is harder than everyone else is doing. It is not because you're a better person. It is not because you are more valuable to the choir. It is because we are seeking that place of mental cognitive dissonance in our learning at all times. If you're not confused, you're not learning. And so I explain that to them. Here is why you're doing that extra thing. And then same thing I tell to the senior kid, which does exist, where some of the seniors in my program don't ever get to level 6. And that's okay, because they're still feeling that growth, that cognitive dissonance, that having to pause and stop and think and figure, that is so good for humans' brains. And one of the things that really frustrates me is that when I see educators talk about how we don't need to teach XYZ skill because there's a machine that does that now. And to me, that blows my mind that there are educators who know so little about how the human brain works that they can't see value in that struggle, because it is the struggle that literally builds the synapses for thinking, critical thinking, being able to synthesize and desynthesize and come up with solutions, and creativity is because of the cognitive dissonance that we work through as students. Yes, there are calculators that can do mathematical equations, but there is still value in teaching kids to do it on paper and work it out in their head because it's forming synapses. So these are conversations that, because the kids in doing it this way and doing it with this literacy connected way through our repertoire, they can get so efficient at doing it that it allows them time to do what Harry Wong is saying here. Even in my stupidly short 44-minute classes, they can learn the music and still have time to discuss, talk, and share with each other what they're feeling, what they're thinking, and describe that cognitive dissonance. And so this is probably the longest explanation ever for why we can't overprogram, but why it's also important that we don't underprogram. It's about figuring out where that carrot needs to be dangled, as we talked about in part 3. So we want them struggling, but then getting it in a relatively short amount of time. But we don't want them to fly through it and sing it exactly the right way on the first try. We want them to struggle, but have it feel attainable. It's a struggle that they can see the light at the end of the tunnel. Because if it's such a struggle that they can't see that light, they will give up. If it's a first time it was correct thing, then they will also give up because they won't see that working hard in this class is a big deal. So one of the most common questions I get through the show is, how do I pick repertoire for my kids based on how they read? And of course, I usually have to respond, I don't know, because I don't know your kids. I can't see them work through these things. And the way I do it with my kids is I'm watching them, and I'm watching to see where they struggle and on what types of things they struggle on, so that I can make better decisions about those individual kids and what they need. But the so important part of this process is allowing them to talk through those things with each other and with me, which all goes back to culture and how open can we get our kids to be about their own confusion and about if their mistakes. And this is one thing I talk about a lot too, where we model that ourselves. Like, if I make a mistake, I want to show them that I can talk through that too. I screwed up that rhythm, and because when I saw that, I thought I lost track of where the beam was, and whatever. So whatever mistake I make, I try to narrate for them why I made that mistake, so that it doesn't seem weird, so that it doesn't just seem like, well, I suck at music because I made a mistake. I have to project perfection. No, I don't. And so these are all conversations that we should have through the repertoire. Okay, here's another quote from Harry. Good old Harry. The ineffective teacher, this is one of my favorite ones because this might cause some butthurt among listeners who are open to new ways, because this is one of the most common things that I see on Facebook groups. People wanting a fun activity to start school with. Fun is great, but be fun. This is me, by the way. This is not Harry Wong yet. I'll get there. Be fun and then do academic activities. Don't seek a fun activity. Just be a fun teacher and then drive them towards academic processes. Okay? Because it's not one or the other. Here's what Harry says. The ineffective teachers begin their first day of school by covering the subject matter. So here's what we're going to talk about. And then doing a fun activity. The effective teachers spend time explaining, and as we talked about, I think it was part 2, demonstrating and having them act out how the class is going to be organized, how it's going to be structured, and more importantly, this is where the rubrics come back in, that the student knows exactly what to do to succeed. So the exact quote there is in my notes in the Patreon drive for this series. I editorialized that, but that's a very close editorialization of Harry Wong. So in choir, these learning materials are our first songs. Choose ones that teach ensemble structure, expectations, before we dive into that polished performance level challenge, right? So it has to be process over product to start. And then I promise the product will come, but the process is important, and we upload that, so to speak, into their brains right at the beginning of the year. Here's another one. Not all students complete their assignments, often because they either cannot understand the assignment or they fail to see the reason for doing it. In both cases, the assignment may be poorly designed. That's another quote from Harry Wong. Choose repertoire that is clear in purpose and accessible. Otherwise, students disengage. So this is another idea where my thoughts about this, maybe I just, internalized so much of this book in the 90s when I read it the first time that now that I come back to it 20 years later, I just was brainwashed. I don't know. Or it's that his observations and my observations are just too similar, which is that carrot dangling thing again. So they either don't see the reason to do the work, or they don't have the skills to do the work. Either way, they choose to not do the work. And so in our choir rehearsals, these are the kids that figure out that they can just phone it in. And when you've got kids that have figured that out, oftentimes it's really, really hard to get them back. So this is where that engaging repertoire is important, but also those rehearsal procedures and the ways to hold them accountable, incentivize them for being held accountable for how they rehearse is so important. Are you a director new to the profession, or are you a seasoned director who is in a new place? One of my favorite tips for generating interest in the program and to instill buy-in is to plan a trip. There are so many options. You can go to Orlando, you can go to Ireland, or you can perform in a parade or a theme park. You can even take the stage at Carnegie Hall in New York. Wherever you end up, not only will your current crew look forward to the trip, but younger students will count the days until it's their turn to go. If you have no idea where to start, connect with Kaleidoscope Adventures at mykatrip.com. All right, let's get into the nitty-gritty here. We were in the meat, now we're in the nitty-gritty. Here's a concept. I'm going to number these concepts so that you can keep track of them very, very easy. Concept number 1, on the first day of school, first time that they open a piece of sheet music or you project it on the wall, have them start with something you know ahead of time that they will be successful doing. This is not the time to try to challenge them or push them. The rigor comes once they believe that they can, and that's really important. So it is, yes, you're indoctrinating them. Yes, you're tricking them. But that very first excerpt, you have them read /sing /echo by rote / whatever it is that you do musically, repertoire, performance-wise at the beginning of the school year, needs to be something you are pretty darn confident that they will do with success so that they're excited about the way they sound. Okay? So don't confuse, don't get it twisted. It does not mean the first song at the beginning of the year has to be the easiest song in the world, or that if your kids read level 2 on Sight Reading Factory, that it has to only be stepwise and only have half notes and quarter notes. That's not what I'm saying. But maybe there's a section of the song. You're not going to learn the whole song in the first day. Maybe there's a portion of the song that's gratifying and readable and learnable in a short amount of time, even if it's 4 measures. And the trick is, of course, finding that spot in the repertoire before class starts so that you know exactly where you're going with it, and having rehearsed, if it's not part of your personality, having rehearsed that super exciting, hyped up response that you're going to give when the success that you knew was already going to be there shows up. Because this is about getting them to buy in as quickly as possible. So Harry Wong says, students need mastery experiences to believe they can succeed. So we give them in small doses early in the school year. So in a choir class, the first repertoire that we select should be achievable and sound good quickly. It sets the tone for how students feel about choir. So in my repertoire examples, I'm going to mostly focus on beginning level kids because I think that's the most universal. Whether you teach middle school or whether you teach high school or a secondary choral methods class, this would all be more relevant to everyone. And so that's how I'm going to stick, of course, on if you have more advanced choir repertoire first day of school for a more advanced choir question, that's a great thing for us to discuss over on the Choralosophy's Facebook page. But I'm going to stick with what for me are ninth graders, but these in our district, ninth graders are really truly beginners because of how little middle school choir they get. So this for you, this could be sixth graders. If they have everyday choir, that's awesome for you. I'm super jealous. But if they have that, this could also apply. Some of this repertoire could actually apply to you as well. So one example, this is from several years ago that I did with beginning level kids. Now I'm going to give you one that I swung and missed on and one that was successful. So there is a SAB setting of a piece called If You Can Walk, You Can Dance by Elizabeth Alexander. And it has a lot of repeated material, so ostinati. It has a variety of very readable, very solfegeable, very takadimi-able rhythms, pitch patterns, and that can be synthesized for beginning level kids and learned relatively quickly. And it's fun. It's up-tempo. It's about the social experience of singing. Text comes from a Zimbabwean proverb. And so we did that with our beginning treble kids and our beginning tenor bass kids and combined them in a concert. So they each learned it in their own class. It came off really well. They thought it was a little bit, goofy at first, but then they enjoyed it and we put movement with it. And it's something that we could learn in a very small amount of class time. And then in that same school year, I really screwed it up with giving our beginning level tenors and basses Matthew Herman's arrangement of the Rocky Road to Dublin, which is awesome, but it was too hard. And it was outside of a tessitura that was appropriate for those ninth grade changing voice boys, and it forced them into a strain too early in the school year for a technique that they were not yet ready for. And so the lesson there is that we're not only looking for complexity of notes and rhythms that is appropriate for their level, but we're also looking for range for how long it sits up at the top of the staff, which is why I killed the tenors that year. I have had ninth grade guys groups in the past that could do that, but it doesn't mean that I should have chosen it in the fall for a group of ninth grade boys that I don't know, because they're not all the same. And that particular year group should not have done that. They probably could have done it in the spring. And so just gives you an idea. Of course, if you're listening, you can feel free to Google these pieces, but I think I'm going to try to discuss these in a way that is relatively general while giving you some ideas along the way. Another super successful one for the very beginning of the year, Grow Little Tree, Andrea Ramsey, 2 parts, very, very readable. And our kids learned that almost entirely student independent, solfeging, no notes played on the piano. That was a really good way to establish the process at the beginning of the school year for our beginning trebles that year. Another Harry Wong concept directly from the book here is number 2, teach procedures through music. Harry Wong says, classroom materials should reinforce routines, how to turn in homework, how to use resources, etc. So in a choir class, we choose pieces that let us teach key ensemble habits, watching the conductor, vowel unification, dynamic shaping, timing of the breath. As I mentioned earlier in the episode, how to get my starting pitch. Everybody's got their own process for that. For me, it's we play the tonic, and then we audiate where our starting pitch is, and the whole group has to sing that. And that is on every repetition, by the way. Every single repetition. We do not go on until the choir, all of them, have sung their starting pitch a cappella from the tonic. And eventually they get, even within the first 3 or 4 weeks, they don't need the tonic played multiple times. Usually that audiation process works so quickly that they get that starting pitch once, that tonic once. And then we rehearse without touching any reference to the key for several minutes until there's distraction or something takes us off our game or whatever. And so we establish that process. So what would be really dumb for me as a teacher is I choose a piece of music that doesn't lend itself to that. At the very beginning of the year for my beginners, I'm not probably going to choose a lot of polyphonic phrase starts, if that makes sense, because that throws in another wrench of confusion to a beginner that's never done this before and have never done it the weird way that I do it. And so by giving that polyphonic phrase entrance, we've now taken away that core routine of, okay, here's measure 22, here's what B flat sounds like because we're in the key of B flat. We play that, and then everyone sings that tonic and then sings their starting pitch. Well, but if my starting pitch doesn't happen for 2 pages because my part hasn't come in yet, that's not a really good way for us to establish the routine. It doesn't mean it's not a good song to do at the beginning of the year, whatever that polyphonic piece is. It's just that's probably not the best song to use in the first days of school to establish a routine if that routine is important to you. And hopefully that makes sense to you. That's not an abstract concept. I just use that as an example of how we start our repetitions. So we're teaching the procedure through the music. And so if there is a key procedure, no pun intended, a particular procedure for you that is crucial, figure out places in the music where you can go early in the year to establish that procedure. Okay, so another example here of a success for a beginning level choir class. This is kind of a choral repertoire staple, but I'll throw this out there, the Tres Cantos Nativos Marcos Leite arrangement. Now, this is one that is great for establishing that routine. So I use the example of how do we get the whole group engaged for every repetition? Well, we don't play the notes for them, which forces them to get engaged from that very first chord, and we don't move on unless the chord is there. So that happens before even there is a tempo established or anything else like that. We just hear, we have to get all the voice parts. We can also look to see all the individual singers. Are they all engaged? And since no one's going to play it ahead of time, you can't just listen and phone it in. So we can watch their eyes. We can watch them doing the little furrowed brow to figure out, do I start on do or do I start on so? And we give them time as beginners. Like it's not going to be, like my advanced kids do, where they hear the tonic and I play it and I say, okay, everybody starting pitch, boom. And it takes them that little time. The beginners, though, they work slow, and we can watch for engagement during that time. So I might say, here's the starting pitch, play it, have them sing it. Okay, Now find your starting pitch. You have 10 seconds. And I let them kind of count through 10 seconds. And then I might say, sing your first pitch and give them that downbeat. Then we go on, right? So Tres Cantos was a great piece to establish that routine. Now, it was a little bit of a tricky thing in our tenor bass class because they were also dealing with some pitch matching things at the beginning of the year. That is always the case. But once we get that kind of worked out, at least with the vast majority of them, they can still start to get to that procedure, even though there are some individual singers that might take a month or 2 months to get the pitch matching aspect of it right. But for the sopranos and altos, it was very, very smooth because there are so many homophonic starts to phrases in that piece that even though there are some polyphonic things that happen later and each group's doing different things and there are layering of melodies and et cetera, if you know that piece and all the jungle noises and all of that, that's great. But that's not part of the procedure that is normal to our class routine. So we can do all those fun extra things or those avant-garde kind of aspects to the music while taking those simple chordal homophonic phrase starts, which are crucial to our rehearsal process, and teaching them how that process works. And they don't even realize, that's the fun part, they don't realize they're learning a process. They think they're learning a song. And I am fully happy to have them be tricked with that. They're learning a process. I'm tricking them while they're having fun learning a song into learning or being indoctrinated into a procedure that is going to serve them as long as they are in the class. Another one that was really successful, at least with the kids that could handle cringy humor, was called If I Were a Dog. And it's a John Paul Rudoy. It's a Graphite Publishing. Don't forget, you can get a discount over there on Graphite, by the way, when you enter Choralosophy. I don't talk about it as much anymore, but don't forget, you can still get that discount over there. But this was an awesome piece. John Paul Rudoy, If I Were a Dog. It's kind of equal parts funny, touching, sad, and sweet, but it's very kind of corny dad jokes almost related to the text in a lot of ways. And so I had some boys that were kind of uncomfortable going there at the beginning of the year. And so be careful with that. It's kind of tricky if you don't know the personality level of the group or personality type of the group, that some of those out there pieces might not be a great way to start the year. But in terms of teaching procedure and teaching, so there's some key changes and will allow us to introduce that concept as well. So that was a good one. And it would fall into the category of type of song that sounds hard, partly because of the piano accompaniment and some of the modulations in there. It sounds hard, but it isn't. So they were able to learn that relatively straightforward, relatively quickly. That was a couple of years ago that we did that. If you're thinking in the SATB, if you're beginners or SATB, maybe depending on age of beginner, you might not, for example, if you're 6th grade, 7th grade beginner, you might not do an SATB, right? But if you've got SATB beginner, then pieces like Craig Hella Johnson, Let the River Run, Omnia Soul, Randall Stroop, those are other pieces that I would say fit this method really, really well, where you can take your literacy work from Sight Reading Factory and just continue it right into the repertoire. So they start to really master this concept of hearing tonic and being forced to audiate, where does my part live within that chordal structure, and then working through it in the same way that they would work through a Sight Reading Factory exercise if it were on the screen. So all these concepts tend to flow really well together with pieces like this. Okay, concept number 3, progressive skill building. Harry Wong says textbooks, workbooks, etc. are selected to build skills in a logical sequence. So in a choir class, early repertoire for the school year should scaffold literacy and vocal technique, preparing for more advanced pieces later. I mentioned this earlier, but now let's dig into it. So if I have a concept that I would really want students to learn for later, let's say it's the difference between major and minor, right? I'm a do-based minor person. Let's not fight about it. I'm a do-based minor person, so that's a procedure and that's a process that would be important for me to scaffold in at the very beginning of the year, even if it is simply to introduce the concept so that they learn language to apply to it later as we get to it more often. Because for obvious reasons, we're not going to do a major keys unit in a choir class. On the fall concert, everyone, we're doing major keys. So all songs on this concert will be in a major key. No, none of us think that way, and that would be a silly way to think. And so we have to train kids for a procedure that is like that, where one song might be in a tonality and the next song might be in another tonality. And so we are able to then think through, how do I engage with that at the very beginning of the year to kids that have not done this before and that they're beginners? How do we introduce that language? Well, one of the best ways to do that is to find a piece that has a major key section and a minor key section in it, whether it's parallel minor or any other kind of minor, a relative minor, etc. You're introducing the concept, and by doing that, even if it's the simplest, shortest little 8-measure vacation to a minor key, then we're introducing the tonality to their ears, of course, which we should be doing during warm-ups and during sight reading time and all of that. But where we now take it into the repertoire and say, oh no, what do we do here? So for me, that's, since I'm do-based, that gives us a chance to introduce, how do I even write my solfege into my music if it's a tricky thing, right? And so there, just how do I spell me versus me? Or how do I spell le versus la? And how do I know which one to use? And where do I go in the key signature to figure out if it's that or the other thing? And so there are generative conversations that we're able to have through the repertoire. We don't need to have a music theory unit in order to talk about these things. They are generated by the repertoire. So a good example of that would be Randall Thompson's A Girl's Garden. There are D minor verses going on, and then all of a sudden later in the piece, there is an F major, big old chordal, moment that happens. The key signature has not changed, but it is very much auditorily, you're hearing D minor change into F major. It's awesome. It's a great piece for beginners because it's strophic, so they get to learn a tune at the beginning, and then they have all that patter lyrics and lots of words to fit in. There's a story, it's cute, and the girls especially can identify with it. It's about a girl wanting to feel like she can grow the garden without her dad's help, and her dad doesn't believe in her, but eventually she proves herself, and all this kind of stuff, right? And so it's very early 20th century feminist, and so you get those themes in there, but you also get to introduce this concept of minor versus major, and how do we change where our do goes if we're do based. If you're law based minor, then that's great for you too, because then you can have them do it by ear, where they hear, how the tonality has shifted, even though the key signature has not. So regardless of your method, that's a great piece for that. Concept number 4 is repertoire as a culture setter. Harry Wong says, materials communicate expectations and standards. So materials we choose, for us, again, that's sheet music for the most part, plus, whether it's a 3-minute theory wet tab on their Chromebook or the Sight Reading Factory tab, all of these things are our materials. So the materials set a culture, they're a set of standards that go with that material that sends a message. So in a choir class, the opening pieces that we choose communicate what kind of choir we're going to be. Whether that standard of excellence is communicated at the very beginning of the year, what we believe about diversity, what we believe students and performers can achieve about emotional expression or community building, or whatever it is that your focus is at the beginning of the year, that also needs to be represented in your repertoire at the beginning of the year, because this is where their eyes are open to, and their hearts oftentimes are more open at the beginning of the year too. To what is this experience going to be like? We have to sell it to them, and we should probably sell it to them without false advertising. For example, if we say we're a program focused on diversity or on equity or whatever it is, and then our entire program at the beginning of the school year is all white dudes, well, then it's not that there's anything wrong with having people sing music by white dudes. I'm a white dude, and I think that many white dudes have written good music. That's not the point. The point is that it is hypocritical. It is also, we say we're going to do a thing and then we don't do the thing. So that would be a great example, I think, of how that process could work. If you're going to talk about being a diverse program, then program that at the beginning of the year. Show them. And then, of course, continue that process throughout and be open, be expressive, be vulnerable with kids about why you choose the music that you do. But let's say that is not your focus. Let's say you care about diversity, but the main thing that you want them to get out of your class is you want them to get out some type of a community building, we're all here for each other kind of a vibe. Great. Choose a piece that tells that story. Have them feel that. So I'm not giving you a right answer here on how to think about these things. I'm just trying to help you understand this concept that Wong lays out for texts and materials, that the materials we choose will send a message. They will communicate an expectation, even if we don't say it. They will communicate that expectation. And so we just have to be careful that we don't send a message we didn't intend, or that we don't intend to follow through with later. I hope that makes sense. So here would be an example. One of the generative themes, so to speak, that I believe very strongly in for the programs that I lead is the power of collaboration in choral music and why we come together to make the music and why it's not just a fount of knowledge flowing from the conductor. The students have input. If it's adult singers, they have input. The product we finally put on stage, so to speak, is a result of our collaboration. And that's something I talk about a lot. And so I want to make sure that the repertoire does that at the beginning of the year. And it could be the song itself, but it also could be the way we choose to perform the song or learn the song. So I chose last year a piece called Landslide. This is a Stevie Nicks famous song, and it's the Marianne Mulia Smith arrangement, which was too difficult primarily for our beginning trebles, but with the help of our advanced trebles, they could do it more sufficiently. Okay, do it more justice. So knowing that it was kind of beyond the level of the beginners, but knowing that if we had the help of the older kids, they could do something like that. And also knowing that it's not going to be perfect because those kids don't meet all in the same class. But I chose it anyway because the goal was not necessarily a perfect, polished final product, which it was not. I will not be sharing that recording. And girls, if you're listening, I love you. We didn't sing all the right notes. We didn't sing all the right rhythms. But underneath all of that wasn't really the point. The point was program building, to have the upper level kids be working with the lower level kids, have the lower level kids feel like they're doing something loftier, and also feeling like they're part of a community, they're part of a program, similar to how, this is how I see it, similar to how like a C team or JV sports team might practice with the varsity players so that they get to know each other and that the younger kids also see them as part of the program. And that they, like, I'm not just on this team, I am part of this bigger picture that is choir at this school, or that is football at this school, or baseball, or whatever it is. And so that's kind of, maybe that's my coach background. I see that value, even if it's not a perfect rehearsal situation that doesn't yield a perfect performance result, does it give us one of those bigger picture zoomed out benefits later? And I think that was a good example of a piece. Now, Landslide, that 4-part SSA arrangement might be too hard for some of your choirs, and it doesn't have to be that exact piece. But I think if you look for ways to get your groups, if you have more than one group, to collaborate, to combine, those can be really formative and positive experiences. And concept number 5 is avoid busy work music. So Wong warns against filler assignments that waste time. And we talked about this in the grading episode, part 3, I think it was. Yes, it was. Part 3, we talked about not grading things that don't matter. This would be an example too. Avoid music that feels like busy work. This was a big fail for me in our program last year. We had too many concerts going on all at once in the spring. And in order to fill those concerts, it meant we had to drive our advanced group way too hard. It caused a lot of negativity, a lot of feeling like we couldn't ever just be in community because we were always learning notes and rhythms. And so we oversold, and that's kind of the reality sometimes of running a program. One of those concerts was a big fundraiser, and we needed to do that fundraiser. But the result was we kind of had to sacrifice the positive vibes of our choir class on the altar of that fundraiser. And pushing up to spring break, constantly learning new stuff and feeling the pressure of, how do I get this? I missed 2 days of school and I've missed all of the German pronunciation of this Mendelssohn piece. This starts to feel like busy work when we do this to kids. So again, I'll probably throw this in there occasionally. I've done this over the years. When I share these things, I don't want you to think that I'm sharing these things because I'm perfect at it. Oftentimes, everything I'm advising, I'm guilty of doing. And that's how I know that we should probably think about these things. I felt the negative impact of making some of these mistakes. It comes from over-programming, but it also comes from unintentional programming, where we just, I need this piece because we got 3 more minutes we got to fill on this concert. Do you? Do you have to fill those 3 minutes? If it doesn't serve a purpose, finish the concert 3 minutes earlier. You don't have to fill that time. If you have the time to be intentional and fill that time with something that does all the other things we just talked about, that leads them to a procedure or leads them through a culture or leads them to a skill that you are trying to build, then fill that 3 minutes time. But if it doesn't, do better work on less music. That's really important. So Harry Wong, again, warns against filler assignments in general. Filler assignments just to keep the kids busy. That isn't valuable for them. And it also causes them to tune out other assignments that we give them later that are valuable, because we lose their trust when we start to give them busy work. They don't take it seriously. So the choir parallel here would be to avoid pieces that simply fill the time or kill time, but don't build transferable skills. Every piece should serve as a pedagogical purpose. So one way I've been guilty of that in the past, and this is a lesson I've learned, I think, and I'm pretty good at this now. It doesn't mean I'm perfect, but I have learned from past mistakes where, let's say I've got 4 choirs on a concert, right? 2 of them might be more advanced and 2 of them might be more beginner level. And the 4 choirs on the concert, the advanced groups have 3 songs. And so in the past, I would say to myself, well, those beginner level kids need to have 3 songs too, because their parents came spend just as much time to be here. I don't want them to show up to hear their kid just sing 1 or 2 songs, and then they're going to be mad, etc. And so I would just to fill time and to make it look equal on paper, 3 songs, 3 songs, 3 songs, 3 songs. Look, everybody's happy, and I would just say, oh, well, we'll do easier songs. But the reality is that isn't a intentional way to program for the concert. So I started to think more in terms of what do these kids need through all those concepts that we just discussed, and if that equals 1 long song for a choir or 2 songs and another group's doing 3 songs, etc. It doesn't matter. Ultimately, it's not about the parents and what they want when they come to the concert. It's about what the kids want and what the kids need. Well, scratch the want, because oftentimes they don't know what they need. That's our job. We're the teachers. All right, we're going to finish up here with some practical strategies. Number 1, we're going to pick the quick win piece that can be sung in harmony by the 2nd or 3rd rehearsal. Like, it doesn't have to be the whole song, but where cohesive portions of a song within the first 2 or 3 days, they're already singing it. We call that the quick win. They are things that we can start to build tone, we can start to build confidence and get them excited going out the door because they're learning music and they're learning quickly and they're seeing it take shape. It doesn't mean that all of the music that they do all school year long has to be quick. Okay, but we do have to show them the progress while they're still skeptical. Right? That's important. There's a psychology there where if the very first thing we have them do is that thing that takes 3 weeks just to get it to sound like a song, no, especially with the beginners, we will lose them. Maybe not all of them, but we will lose a good portion of them, and we want to convince them. So that pick 1 quick win piece that can be sung in harmony by the 2nd or 3rd rehearsal. Here's another one. Choose at least 1 piece that models the kind of diction, phrasing, and tone that you want all year. Now, I would amend that just a little bit to say maybe you don't want 1 method of diction or tone or phrasing all year, but you can pick 1 piece that is your default. Okay. So just had this conversation with my colleague this last week choosing repertoire, where we said, like, do we want to do a pop song and a more traditional choral song right off the bat at the beginning of the year? Now, my vote is yes. I think it actually helps kids to sing in more than one way at the very beginning of a school year, because it starts to open up their ears to the idea that they can. So the more colors they can experiment with, the easier it is for them to conceptualize, okay, for this song, we want to color within this window of, last week we tried all kinds of different sounds, and we proved to ourselves that we can do all those different types of sounds, etc. So we're finding not only the procedure that we want for the beginning of the year in that repertoire, but we're also finding those colors, those vocal colors, and those approaches to the technique at the beginning. Another practical tip, start literacy-friendly repertoire with clear rhythms and diatonic melodies to introduce notation reading. Super, super important. That procedure from your sight reading factory or other sight reading texts that you start with transfer directly into the repertoire. And if you overshoot that, then you'll have to cut corners, and then they won't understand the value of the work you did at the beginning of class. Another one, balance fun and accessible with aspirational. Don't burn them out with only challenging literature, but don't go so easy that they feel it's beneath them. We're back to the carrot and the stick, right? And finally, keep an eye on how the texts and themes of the music set cultural expectations. Community, empathy, joy, diversity, hard work, whatever it is that you're trying to make the theme or the culture of the room should be reflected in the repertoire that you choose. So with this, take it all with a grain of salt, as always. I hope you found something here that you can use, and that you can ignore some things, of course, and choose the things that you do like. And if nothing else that you got out of this series, and if this episode of the series is that you are thinking about with intent every song that you choose. What purpose will this serve? And will it elevate the kids' experience so that they're ready for more and they keep coming back for more? Because that's ultimately what it's all about. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of a conversation. If you are still hearing my voice, that means you're one of the MVPs, one of the diehards, one of the real ones, as the kids say. So if you are willing on the way out to check out a few different ways that you can help me continue to make this show high quality. One, use the promo code. That's the biggest one at Sight Reading Factory, at mymusicfolders.com, at mychoirropes.com, at graphitepublishing.com, and endeavormusicpublishing.com. All of those take the Choralosophy checkout code. And of course, now the newest one is 3-Minute Theory. You can get a 15% discount when you enter Choralosophy at checkout there. And of course, going to Apple Podcasts and leaving a positive review is very helpful there, and sharing the episodes to your colleagues in real life and on social media. All of those things are incredibly helpful and allow me to continue to create this resource for you. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.